Thomas Griffin wasn't just a man with a past. He was a man who wielded his past like a weapon. Picture him, a decorated hero of the Crimean War, medals gleaming, stories of battlefield bravery trailing behind him like a cloak. And Griffin knew exactly how to use that shine. He carried those honours into every room, every office, every opportunity, climbing the social and political ladder with the confidence of someone who believed the world owed him more. Born in County Antrim in 1832, he began in the Royal Irish Constabulary before volunteering for the Crimean War, where he earned 2 decorations and a commission in the Turkish contingent. By the time he arrived in Victoria in 1857, he was already crafting the persona of a man destined for authority. He married quickly, a supposedly wealthy widow who had children as old as himself, and abandoned her just as quickly. Then came New South Wales, where he slipped into the police force, and soon after, Rockhampton, where he rose to Chief Constable. Brisbane followed, and with it a suspiciously smooth promotion to Clerk of Petty Sessions. Thanks, it was whispered, to the influence of a well-connected woman who believed Griffin was hers alone. But behind the polished exterior, the cracks were widening. His arrogance made him despised on the Clermont goldfields. His gambling drained his purse. His wife tracked him down and demanded money. And the politician's sister, once his greatest ally, turned her back when she discovered the truth. Then came the scandal that should have ended him. Griffin stole a letter meant for Clermont's chief magistrate, Oscar de Sache, a blatant abuse of power. A civil inquiry was called, but held in Brisbane, where few witnesses could appear. Griffin walked away untouched. The rumours didn't stop. Embezzlement, missing miners' funds, public outrage, a petition for his removal. And just when it seemed the walls were closing in, he was quietly transferred, first to Toowoomba, then back to Rockhampton. By 1867, the facade finally collapsed. Chinese miners entrusted him with £252, a significant sum. When the time came to settle the account, Griffin couldn't pay. The hero of Crimea, the polished magistrate, the man who had climbed so high on charm, medals, and manipulation, was exposed as a fraud. And the fall that followed would be catastrophic. The date is Wednesday, March 18th. The courtroom is packed, the air thick with anticipation. Before Mr. Justice Lutwich and a full common jury, a man is brought forward. A man whose name has already become a dark whisper across Queensland. Thomas John Augustus Griffin, former magistrate, former Gold Commissioner, former war hero, now a prisoner under remand, standing in the dock with the weight of 2 dead men on his shoulders. The clerk reads the indictment, each word landing like a hammer blow. Griffin is charged that, at the Mackenzie River, on the 6th of November, 1867, he did feloniously, willfully, and of his malice, aforethought kill and murder Patrick Cahill and John Power. 2 names, 2 lives, 2 men whose final journey ended in blood and betrayal. And there stands Griffin, the polished gentleman who once commanded authority, with a signature and a stare, now facing the ultimate reckoning. The jury watches him, the public watches them, and Justice Lutwich watches everyone. This is no ordinary trial. This is the moment the facade finally meets the truth. The courtroom was silent when the Crown rose to speak. Every eye fixed on the man in the dock, Thomas John Augustus Griffin, once a magistrate, once a Gold Commissioner, once a man of authority. Now he stood accused of the most chilling betrayal imaginable. the murder of two young gold escort troopers, Patrick Cahill and John Power. The Attorney General began slowly, deliberately, letting the weight of the case settle over the room. These were not strangers, he reminded the jury. Cahill and Power were men Griffin knew, men who trusted him, men who served under the very escort system he once commanded. And Griffin, though no longer magistrate at Clermont, still wielded influence, still carried himself like a man who expected obedience. But beneath that polished exterior, the Crown argued, something darker had been brewing. The pressure builds. The jury heard how Griffin had been entrusted months earlier with £252 belonging to 6 Chinese miners. Money he had failed to forward, money they were now demanding back. When they confronted him in Rockhampton, he stalled, delayed, and finally paid them. He paid them with bundles of £1 notes that had been sealed by the bank for the gold escort. Notes that should have been untouched. Notes that should have been on the road to Clermont. The escort is reformed. The Attorney General then walked the jury through the suspicious reshuffling of the escort. Sergeant Julian, who had twice attempted to start the journey, was abruptly dismissed by Griffin. In his place, Griffin appointed Cahill and Power, younger, more pliable, easier to control. The Crown highlighted the moment Power asked Griffin to seal the bag of banknotes. Griffin resisted, then suddenly agreed. The Attorney General argued that Griffin sealed the bag only because he knew that Power would not take them unless he did so. And then came the most damning question of all. Why was Griffin travelling with the escort at all? He had no authority, no duty, no reason. The night at the Mackenzie. The escort camped near Bedford's public house in proximity to what is now Bedford Weir. The last time the troopers were seen alive was around 6 or 7 p.m. Griffin stayed behind at the camp while the men were away. He arranged to leave at 4 a.m. with Bedford, an odd choice, given the dangers of the Mackenzie scrub. Then, before dawn, he appeared at Bedford's door, exhausted, carrying his saddle and swag. He claimed he had been lost for an hour. Bedford told him he'd heard 2 shots. Griffin insisted he'd heard only 1. But the Crown pointed out that Griffin gave different stories to different people. A classic sign of a man trying to outrun his own lies. The bodies. When the bodies were found the next day, the scene was horrifying. Power lay on his back, head resting on an overturned saddle. Cahill lay only yards away, his body twisted, his head bent forward. Their revolvers were beside them. Cahill's fully loaded, Power's with only 1 shot fired. Blankets had been burned, ashes piled high. Pieces of sealing wax clung to the charred fabric. Sealing wax from the escort bundles. The Crown told the jury plainly. The murderer had tried to burn the evidence. The tracks. Then came the detail that made the courtroom lean forward. The soil around the camp was black and loamy, perfect for holding tracks. And in that soil, the native police found only 1 set of footprints leading away from the camp. Griffin's. They traced his small boot prints to a log where he had sat, then back toward the road. There was not another track except prisoners' own outside the camp. If Power had been searching for horses, where were his tracks? The motive. The Crown laid it bare. Griffin had stolen the Chinese miners' money. He had used the escort bundles to repay them. If the escort reached Clermont, the missing funds would be discovered. Griffin would be exposed, ruined, arrested. So he did the unthinkable. He silenced the only 2 men who could reveal the truth. The final blow. When Griffin returned to Rockhampton, He paid for drinks with a torn £1 note, a note proven to be from the Escort bundles. Another note from the same bundle was later found near the place he had slipped into the bush on the road home. He was caught with the stolen property before the murders. He was caught with the stolen property after the murders. And the Crown ended with a line that echoed through the courtroom. Griffin had sealed the Escort bag, and in doing so, he sealed his own fate. The witnesses take the stand. The case against Griffin deepens. The courtroom was packed again as the Crown began calling its witnesses. One by one, the people who had seen Griffin in the days before the murders, who had handled the money, who had watched the Escort form and dissolve under his orders. Each witness added another thread to a tightening noose. One, Sergeant James Julian, the man Griffin tried to push aside. Julian, a seasoned Escort sergeant, stepped into the witness box with the calm confidence of a man who had carried thousands of pounds of gold through the bush without flinching. He had known Griffin for years. 7 or 8 years, he said, and had served under him at Clermont. But what he described was not the behaviour of a steady magistrate. It was the behaviour of a man scheming under pressure. Julian recalled how Griffin greeted him in Rockhampton with a startling line. "Julian, I think I'll send you back to Clermont." From there, the story unfolded like a slow-moving trap. Julian described receiving the bank parcels, guarding them, sleeping on them, and watching Griffin grow restless and agitated through the night. He testified that Griffin questioned him about the money, how much there was, whether the notes were signed, details no innocent man should have been so fixated on. And then came the moment that made the courtroom lean forward. Griffin ordered the Escort to split. He sent Power and Cahill back with the money, then tried to lure Julian away from them. When Julian insisted on returning to the troopers, Griffin dismissed him the next day. Julian's testimony painted Griffin as a man manoeuvring pieces on a board, removing the one officer he couldn't control. 2. Robert Hunter, the merchant who saw Griffin cornered. Hunter's evidence was short but devastating. He produced the receipt for the £44 owed to a Chinese miner, money Griffin had failed to forward. When confronted, Griffin brushed it off, claiming he had left it locked up in my safe and that it would arrive by mail. But the mail came, and the money didn't. Hunter's letter to Griffin, "The Chinamen are all bothering me about their money," showed the pressure building. Griffin was running out of excuses, and the miners were running out of patience. 3. Thomas Hall, the bank manager who saw the first cracks. Hall's testimony was meticulous, banker precise. He described the Escort parcels, £8,161 in total, 4 bundles of £1 notes, tightly tied, wrapped, sealed. He confirmed that when Julian returned the parcels, they were untouched, the seals intact. But then Griffin appeared at the bank door, asking whether those fellows had returned the money again. He blamed Julian, called him devilish queer, and threatened to dismiss him, which he did. Hall also revealed that Griffin insisted on travelling with the Escort, despite having no official role. He even resisted sealing the bags until Power demanded it. Hall's testimony showed Griffin as a man trying to control the Escort's movements, the money, and the men themselves. 4. Trooper George Percy Gildea, the last man to see the Escort alive. Gildea's account was chilling. He described seeing Griffin and Power together at Mrs. Otley's, handling parcels wrapped in blue blanket. Parcels the jury knew were the bank bundles. He watched Power ask Griffin to seal the bag, and saw Griffin take it inside and return with a wax seal impressed by his key. He also noted something unusual. The escort left in plain clothes, no uniform, no regulation escort appearance, nothing to mark them as official carriers of thousands of pounds. It was the first time Gildea had ever seen such a thing, and it would be the last time he saw Power and Cahill alive. 5. Yung Kin, the interpreter who received the stolen notes. The Chinaman Yung Kin stepped forward, swearing his oath by blowing out a candle. His testimony was simple, direct, and devastating. He described how Griffin stalled him for days, then finally summoned him and 6 other Chinese miners to the clubhouse. There, Griffin pulled 6 bundles of £1 notes from his pocket, each tied with string, each bearing writing on the outside. Yung Kin counted the money, £252 in total. He recognised the man who later exchanged the notes for sovereigns, the bank teller Kerr. This was the Crown's smoking gun. The notes Griffin paid out were the same notes sealed for the escort. Notes that should have been on the road to Clermont. Notes that were later found burned, torn, or missing from the escort bundles. Every witness added another stone to the weight pressing down on him. And the jury, 12 men watching him closely, were beginning to see the shape of the truth. Friday, March 20th. The evidence tightens like a noose. The courtroom was full before the clock struck 9:30. Everyone knew this day mattered. The Crown had already laid out motive, opportunity, and behaviour. Now they were about to show the jury something even more dangerous. Griffin's own handwriting. Griffin's own money trail. Griffin's own lies catching up with him. T.S. Hall returns and brings the escort receipt book. Thomas Scarrett Hall, the acting bank manager, stepped back into the witness box. But this time, he wasn't there to talk about sealed bundles or escort delays. He was there to identify handwriting. Hall had lived with Griffin for nearly 2 years. He knew the man's script as well as his voice. When handed the old escort receipt book, he flipped through the pages, slowly, deliberately. It is, I have no doubt, in the handwriting of the prisoner. Page after page, all Griffin. Then the clerk of arraigns read the entries aloud. Names the jury had already heard. Amounts the jury already knew. Total, £252. The exact amount the Chinese miners testified Griffin paid them, in notes that should have been sealed for the escort. The courtroom felt the shift. This wasn't rumour. This wasn't theory. This was Griffin's own record book, confirming the debt he had been desperate to cover. The Colt revolver appears. Sergeant William Doyle took the stand next. His testimony was brief but chilling. He produced a Colt revolver, the same type Julian had handed over when Griffin dismissed him. I got it at Mrs. Otley's, in the bedroom, pointed out to me as Mr. Otley's. The implication hung in the air. Griffin had access to a weapon capable of firing the fatal shots. The barmaid's testimony. The torn £1 note. Then came Keziah Seymour, the barmaid from the commercial hotel. She spoke clearly, confidently, the kind of witness juries trust. She remembered Griffin walking in with Bedford and Hornby on Friday, November 11th. She remembered him calling for drinks, and she remembered the note he handed her. It was torn, a piece out of it, then like it is now. She recognised the note in court. The jury recognised the significance. This was one of the escort notes, a note that should have been sealed in a bundle on the road to Clermont, a note that was instead in Griffin's pocket after the murders. When she told him it looked bad, Bedford said, "Oh, you know who you got it from." And Griffin said nothing, just as silence can be louder than words. Alexander Kerr, the bank teller who tracked the notes. Kerr returned to the stand with the precision of a man who lived by numbers. He confirmed the torn note was one he had logged. He confirmed it matched the narration of the Escort bundles. He confirmed it had been paid into the bank before November 9th, the day he began checking every note. Then he dropped the bombshell. "I can swear that those notes formed portion of the notes given to Julian on the 26th October. The Crown now had 228 notes tied to the Escort and tied to Griffin. The Bush discovery, a note in the scrub. Next came Thomas Pitt, a station hand from the Dawson district. His testimony brought the courtroom into the bush itself. He described riding through the Mackenzie scrub near the Italians' camp when something caught his eye behind a patch of brigalow. A £1 note. Torn. Water-stained. Hidden where no traveller would see it. He handed it to his employer, who sent it to the bank. Kerr examined it and confirmed this note formed portion of the money handed to Julian to go by Escort. A note from the Escort. Found near the murder site. Found where Griffin had been seen, stepping into the bush. The day ends, and the case against Griffin looks overwhelming. The Crown didn't need theatrics. The evidence spoke for itself, and the jury knew it. The murder evidence begins. Saturday, March 21st, the day the courtroom finally stepped into the darkness of the Mackenzie scrub. The gallery was full before the judge even took his seat. Everyone knew what was coming. Until now, the trial had been about money, motives and movements. But today, the court would hear about death. Alfred Bedford, the last man to see Griffin before the murders, the publican at the Mackenzie crossing, stepped into the witness box, calm, steady. But the story he carried was anything but. He remembered Griffin arriving on foot between 9:30 and 10 a.m, looking tired, unwell, and strangely eager to explain himself. Griffin claimed he had come only to see the Escort through the scrub, and that he had originally intended to go no further than westward. He helped himself to a Seidlitz powder. He asked for laudanum. He complained of illness. He carried a revolver in a damaged holster. But the details that mattered most were the shots. Bedford testified, "I heard a shot fired. It was 2 minutes before or after 2 o'clock. Then another shot about an hour and a half later. 2 shots, 2 troopers. And then, just before dawn, Griffin appeared at Bedford's door, carrying his saddle, sweating, anxious, and in a hurry to leave. He claimed he had been lost for nearly an hour. He claimed he heard only 1 shot. He claimed Power fired it as a signal, but Bedford had heard 2, and Griffin's story shifted depending on who he spoke to. John Peterson, the man who found the bodies. Peterson's testimony brought the courtroom into the horror of the Mackenzie camp. He described seeing the troopers alive that evening. One in a light coat with a blue netted hat, the other in a Crimean shirt. They stabled a horse. They walked back toward camp. It was the last time anyone saw them breathing. The next morning, Peterson crossed the river and smelled something foul. When he climbed the bank, he saw saddles, then bodies. His voice was steady as he described the scene. Power lying straight on his back, head resting in an upside-down saddle, covered to the nose with a blanket. Tongue protruding, flies and maggots already at work. Cahill lay 3 yards away, twisted on his right side, knees drawn up, head bent forward, a streak of blood across his skull. Between them, boots, a revolver case, vomit, and the remains of a blanket large enough for a third man. The courtroom was silent as he spoke. Even Griffin leaned forward in the dock, staring at the floor. Sub-Inspector Stokes, the bushman who read the ground like a book. Stokes arrived at the camp on November 7th. His testimony was methodical, chilling, and devastating. He found 2 revolvers, one fired, one fully loaded, a towel and soap near Power's head, burnt blanket, canvas, and burnt paper, pieces of sealing wax, twine from the Escort bundles, a billy can of water, 2 coats, 2 hats, 2 pouches, a pack saddle, a fire where someone had tried to destroy evidence. Then came the detail that electrified the courtroom. I discovered the track of one man. I discovered another track. The track of a small foot. I saw no other tracks outside the camp. One man had left the camp alive. One man had walked to a log, sat down, then walked toward Bedford's house. And that footprint, small, round-toed, matched Griffin. Sub-Inspector one of the colony's best trackers. Confirmed everything Stokes had found, and more. He traced the same small boot prints from the camp to the log, then toward Bedford's inn. He measured them. He compared them. It corresponded exactly with the footprints. I saw prisoner leave a footprint. It was the same. Then revealed conversations Griffin had with him. Conversations Griffin never expected to be repeated in court. Griffin told him, Power fired a shot while short-hobbling the horses. Power couldn't reload in the dark. He left Power on watch. He had a weak stomach and wouldn't view the bodies. If the men were poisoned, it must have been by himself or by Mr. Bedford. He feared Dr. Candiotis might infuse poison into the intestines. He was a branded felon. If acquitted, he would leave the colony and change his name. And then the most revealing line of all. The only person I could suggest as having anything to do with it is Julian. Sub-Inspector Elliot, the arresting officer. Elliot described arresting Griffin on November 11th. Griffin's first words, "It is all right. I'll give you my word. I will not attempt to escape." Later, he asked Elliot privately, "Do you think I murdered these men?" Elliot refused to answer. Griffin then said, "It will ruin me. I will have to leave the colony." And when he first heard the escort was dead, he blurted out, "My God, I left them at 1 o'clock. Cahill was on watch." But earlier, he had told others Power was on watch. Detective Kilfeeder, Griffin's own words betray him. Kilfeeder testified that Griffin said, "I would rather be hung at once than transported for life." And, "I know I did wrong in not rousing the men before I left the camp." And, "I had no right to go with the escort. I had nothing to do with it." Every sentence was a crack in the armour. The courtroom knows the net is closed. The Crown had not merely suggested guilt. They had walked the jury through it, step by step, footprint by footprint, lie by lie. And Griffin, once a magistrate, once a war hero, now looked like a man watching the walls close in. The execution of Thomas John Griffin, Rockhampton Jail, Monday, June 1st, 1868, as reported in the Rockhampton Bulletin, June 2nd. Dawn had barely touched the walls of Rockhampton Jail when the final chapter of Thomas John Augustus Griffin, war hero, magistrate, gold commissioner, and convicted murderer, began to unfold. He had spent the night in prayer. The last night. The Reverend Mr. Smith, who had attended Griffin daily since the Tuesday before, stayed with him through almost the entire night. The minister prayed, pleaded, urged him to confess, but Griffin remained unmoved. He denied his guilt, yet not with the righteous fire of an innocent man. His denial was cool, practiced, almost rehearsed. As the bulletin noted, he died, as most of those who knew his vain character thought he would die, denying his guilt, but showing the greatest nerve and firmness to the last. Around 3 a.m, the minister left him briefly. Griffin slept. At 4, the prayers resumed. When morning came, Griffin rose with a strange composure. He smiled faintly and said, "This is my last toilet." He drank tea, ate toast, and prepared himself with the calm of a man dressing for a formal appointment rather than the gallows. By 7:30, the sheriff and police entered the jail. Outside, a crowd had gathered, some climbing trees for a glimpse of the condemned man's final moments. Dr. Salmond, Captain White, and Sub-Inspector Elliot visited him. Griffin's eyes were swollen, and he trembled slightly as he greeted them. He shook their hands, thanked them, and said goodbye. His leg irons were removed. He washed. He dressed himself carefully. Black trousers, vest, and a tightly buttoned dress coat. He was ready. At 8 o'clock, the hangman entered the cell and pinioned Griffin's arms. Griffin asked only one practical question. Will the rope be removed when I'm dead? Assured that it would, he expressed gratitude to the jail officials for their kindness. Then the procession began. The Reverend Smith walked ahead, reciting scripture. Griffin followed, stepping onto the small patch of green between the cell and the scaffold. He looked calm, sad, resigned. His stride was firm as he passed between police and spectators. He glanced at the crowd, not defiantly, not fearfully, simply acknowledging them, as though he were still the magistrate he once had been. At the foot of the gallows, Griffin knelt on a blanket while the minister prayed over him, a long, heartfelt plea for repentance. Griffin joined in the Lord's Prayer, his voice steady, clear, almost serene. Then came the moment that froze the crowd. The minister said softly, "I shall meet you at the judgment seat of God. You have but 2 or 3 minutes to live. In the sight of that God who is to judge us all, I ask you, will you not acknowledge your guilt?" Griffin straightened, drew himself up, and answered in a firm, ringing voice, "No, the final seconds." He shook the minister's hand, then almost ran up the first few steps of the scaffold. The rest he climbed with unwavering steadiness. The hangman slipped the noose over his head. Griffin lifted his chin to help him, letting the rope settle beneath his long, fair beard. His last words were simple. "Lord, have mercy on me." Then to the executioner, "Go on, I am ready." He shifted a white handkerchief from his left hand to his right and held it tightly, even in death. The bolt dropped. Griffin fell. His neck broke instantly. Doctors Salmond, Callahan, Thon, and Robertson examined the body after 35 minutes. Life was extinct. The executioner cut him down. At 9 o'clock, the body was taken to the cemetery and buried in the Church of England ground. The Reverend Smith read the final service over the grave. And so ended the life of Thomas John Augustus Griffin, a man who rose on medals and ambition, fell through deceit and murder, and died with the same unyielding pride that had carried him to the gallows. The headless legend of Thomas John Griffin. When the trapdoor fell beneath Thomas John Augustus Griffin on the morning of June 1st, 1868, most believed the story had finally ended. The murderer of Troopers Power and Cahill had paid the ultimate price. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But Griffin's story did not end at the gallows. It only grew stranger. A wrestle's grave. Griffin was buried quietly in the Rockhampton cemetery, the same ground where the two young troopers he murdered were laid to rest. Their grave bore a solemn inscription: "Of your charity, pray for the repose of the souls of John Power and Patrick Cahill, murdered at the Mackenzie River while in charge of public treasure on the 6th day of November 1867. But Griffin himself was not granted such peace. Within days of his burial, whispers began to circulate. Someone had been seen near the grave at night. Someone had disturbed the earth. Someone had taken something. And then the truth broke like a thunderclap. Griffin's head was gone. The grave robbery. The Rockhampton Bulletin reported the outrage. The trustees of the cemetery confirmed it. The colonial secretary offered a £20 reward. The grave had been opened. 2 coffins removed. The upper coffin, a pauper's, was untouched. The lower coffin, Griffin's, had been opened, and the head was missing. The town buzzed with rumours. Fingers pointed everywhere and nowhere. No one was charged. No one confessed. But everyone had a theory. The suspects, a surgeon, a banker, a newspaper editor, and a sexton. Local gossip named 4 men. Dr. Callahan, a respected surgeon whose name still graces Rockhampton landmarks, was one of those suspects. It was said they had slipped into the cemetery under cover of darkness, lanterns in hand, shovels ready, driven by morbid curiosity and the Victorian obsession with phrenology. The belief that a criminal's skull could reveal the secrets of his mind. Some claimed the skull was taken for scientific study. Others whispered it was a trophy. And some insisted it still sits today on a shelf in an old Rockhampton home, gathering dust. A letter from the past. 50 years later, a private letter surfaced, written by Police Magistrate W. H. Wiseman, just days after the grave was disturbed. In it, Wiseman revealed that a lady strolling through the cemetery had first noticed the tampering. When officials opened the grave, they found a shocking twist. It was not Griffin's, but that of a poor pauper, buried above him in the same grave. According to Wiseman, the wrong head had been taken, but the newspapers of the time told a different story. The Courier reported that when the grave was officially reopened on June 10th, both coffins were examined. The upper coffin was intact. The lower coffin, Griffin's, had its lid unfastened. And the head was missing. 2 versions, 2 truths, or 2 lies. The mystery deepened. A surgeon's confession. Historian J.T. Esbird later wrote that he had spoken directly with one of the grave robbers, a Rockhampton surgeon he called Dr. Blank. According to Bird, Dr. Blank and a mariner known as Dutch dug up the grave the night after the burial. They opened the first coffin, not Griffin. They removed it and found Griffin's coffin beneath. They took Griffin's head. The surgeon hid it in a friend's garden. Later, he kept the skull in his surgery until his death at age 82. Bird insisted both men knew Griffin personally and could not have mistaken the body. If Bird's account is true, then Wiseman's letter was wrong, or deliberately misleading. Rockhampton remembers. Rockhampton families still tell stories passed on by family members. One resident David Perrier, recalled his great-great-grandfather sitting on a kerosene drum in Dr. Callahan's surgery, only to be told, "You know you're sitting on Griffin's head?" Another local, Laurel V's, remembered her grandmother seeing the skull as a child, sitting on Dr. Callahan's desk in his office with pencils sticking out, using it like a pencil holder. These are not the kinds of stories that survive by accident. They survive because they are told in whispers, passed down like forbidden heirlooms. The troopers remembered. While Griffin's remains became the stuff of legend, the two young men he murdered were honoured with dignity. Trooper John Francis Power, 25. Trooper Patrick William Cahill, 27. Their memorial stands near the Mackenzie River crossing, not far from where they died. Their graves lie in the Rockhampton Southside Cemetery, marked and tended. They were the second and third Queensland police officers to die in the line of duty. And almost 200 years later, people still gather to remember them. The final irony. Griffin, who schemed for wealth, status, and power, who used his war medals to climb the colonial ladder, who murdered two young men to cover his theft, did not rest in peace. His grave was violated, his head stolen, his skull passed from hand to hand like a curiosity, his story twisted into legend. Power and Cahill lie together under a stone that asks for prayers. Griffin lies somewhere nearby, headless, nameless, and unremembered except as a warning. This has been a Central Queensland Old Pictures and Yarns presentation, narrated by the History Whisperer. Thank you for viewing and stay tuned for further stories of our local district.